Welcome everyone to a conversation with novelist Maryann Lesert, author of the forthcoming novel Landmarks. I'm Carrie Lesert, legal director for FLOW, for Love of Water, the Great Lakes Legal and Policy Center based in Traverse City, Michigan. I'd like to begin our event by remembering that For Love of Water is located on lands historically and presently occupied by the Anishinaabe, Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. We honor the past and present original water protectors of the Three Fires Confederacy. Today's book talk is a part of FLOW's Art Meets Water initiative, which celebrates the creativity and talents of activist artists, as well as the powerful artistic expressions inspired by the Great Lakes and the natural world. During the talk, we'll have some time for audience questions. If you have a question, please put it in the Zoom chat, and we'll try to answer as many as time allows. Now, I'd like to introduce today's host and moderator, Dave Dempsey, FLOW's Senior Policy Advisor. In addition to being a prolific author himself, Dave has 35 years of experience in environmental policy. He served as an environmental advisor to former Michigan Governor James Blanchard and as policy advisor on the staff of the International Joint Commission, established under the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty between the U.S. and Canada. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks so much. And welcome to all who are participating in today's book talk. I'm pleased we have a chance to talk to Maryann Lesert today because she's got a fantastic new novel that I've had a chance to read. And first, Maryann, I want to just introduce you so our audience knows all about your writing and teaching career. Maryann lives in West Michigan, where she teaches creative writing and environmental literature at Grand Rapids Community College. In 1998, she received a dual BA in art and creative writing from Western Michigan University, which I'm an alumnus of too. As a resident company playwright with Actors and Playwrights Initiative of Kalamazoo, 6 short plays and 3 of her full-length plays received productions, awards, and publication. In 2003, Maryann completed a Master of Fine Art in Writing at Spalding University in Louisville. Her first novel, Base 10, was published by the Feminist Press in 2009, and I've heard a lot of great things about that novel, which I'm hoping to read soon. So we'll start there. And Maryann, I wanted you to begin by just telling us what the story is in Landmark. What's this book about?
Okay. Thanks for that intro, Dave. And thanks to FLOW, too, for this event. I really appreciate your organization. So novels oftentimes have a one-liner that gets put out there as far as what this is about. So I'll read that a minute. Once you've experienced the devastation of fracking, nothing but stopping it makes sense. And then I think the jacket cover on the novel kind of gives a good idea of the overall storyline. So here goes. In the river-crossed Northwoods of Michigan, Kate, Brett, Sonia, and Mark, mentored by their former professor, Rebecca, keep watch as North American Energy, NORA, connects a corridor of frack well sites deep in the state's forests. When NORA expands in an unexpected direction and an awful, bigger plan becomes clear, the action begins. As grassroots activists gather and prepare to stop NORA's dangerous super frack, stresses other than the fracturing of the bedrock appear. Sonia is arrested, Rebecca reveals her hidden past, and the one person who knows both women's stories arrives in camp. Love and solidarity want to win, even if most showdowns with big oil don't end well for those who take a stand. So, I think that covers the idea that the narrator, Rebecca, is a college professor, but she also has an activist past, which she tries to keep away from her teaching. And she meets these very engaged and motivated students who go on to do a lot of research on fracking and tar sands and eventually take a stand.
That's really interesting. One thing I thought was very apparent in the book is that you obviously did some real on-the-ground research about fracking. You didn't just sit in a writer room and write about it. You actually went out and tasted it and smelled it, I guess. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so between the years of 2012 and 2014, roughly, there's a little bit of time before then and after that. I really decided to learn all I could about fracking. I started with all the science of the time, the chemicals used, got it even into, when fracking chemicals or leaks of methane and those kind of things come to bear in the process. But all the science and all the arguments weren't really telling me the whole story. So I did what I call my boots on well sites research, where I literally visited every active frack well site in the state of Michigan for a period of 2 years. And one of the things that was really, I guess, remarkable and remains remarkable to me about it was the people that I met, people who were living with fracking closely, people living next to an active frack well site. They felt like fracking was a secret, that a lot of people in Michigan didn't know that it was occurring, especially in our state forests. And they really were eager to tell their story and kind of get the word out and show us what it looked like, smelled like, felt like. So that's pretty much what I did, immersed myself in their world, I guess.
So what does it look like, and smell like, and taste like?
Oh, there's a lot of descriptions in the novel, and maybe, if you don't mind, maybe that's an okay place to go, a paragraph of description.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I'll say this ahead of time. It's when you see an active frack well site, so 6 to 10 acres of forest floor scraped level and dry, especially during the drilling phases, 110, 120, 136-foot tall drill rig in the middle of the forest. Just an incredible array and splay of tanks and vats and compressors. The noise, the smells, the industrial might in the forest, to me, just felt so wrong. Such a juxtaposition of everything we expect from a state forest. So maybe what I'll do is just read the first, actually the end of the first chapter. In the first chapter of the novel, one of the students, Sonia, has been arrested for an apparent sabotage event. And Rebecca, the narrator, comes to find that she has been arrested. She's worried about influencing them with her own activists, so she's kind of held that part back. But now in the end, she's worried about what people will think of them, labeling them eco-terrorists. So here's a passage when she talks about what a frack well site is like and what people need to understand. So Rebecca, for all my worry about influence, all I wanted now was a chance to intercept, to stop the messaging train. They had tried. For 2 years they had tried, with articles, with songs, with videos of the destruction we had witnessed across the state, with carefully crafted speeches and letters, by standing up at auctions and public meetings. Now they would be labeled. Anyone who doesn't understand how 4 promising students in a literature class could become eco-terrorists should stand at the crest of the 12-foot tall mound of earth surrounding a frack well site, a berm swollen with and smelling of still living roots. Let anyone quick to judge gaze across 10 acres of forest floor scraped level and dry. Let them see and hear, smell and feel the screech of the drill rig biting into brain and bone. Let them stand there trying to comprehend the circus of hoses and coils, the tanks and the vats, piles and piles of half-ton cylinders of pipe, because there is no such thing as a 2-mile-long pipe. The pipes of drilling and fracking thunder end to end as they are lowered into the wellbore, segment following segment, and the drill bit grinds away.
Right. I want to remind people that are attending the event that if you have questions, please post them in the chat and we will take as many as we can during this hour. Maryann, I wanted to find out a little bit more about the word polemic or polemical came up in one of the reviews, actually from a favorable reviewer who liked the book. But the reviewer said that this book is polemical, which in my dictionary means a forceful attack or defense of an idea or a person. So what does that mean in the context of this book?
Yeah, so I always find it interesting that if a character is really invested in a social or a justice-oriented issue, human to human, I very rarely see that called polemical or argumentative. But it's just an unfortunate, I guess, trend or perspective where if somebody is literally putting forth the idea that the environment, the natural world, has intrinsic value that is just as important as our human to human drama and functions, then it becomes oftentimes viewed as argumentative. And I think there's now Rebecca, the narrator, is not perfect. Nobody in the novel is perfect. They're just people who are trying to do the best they can to protect water, land, air. And so Rebecca does have some disdain for the oil and gas industry, but she's also had some experiences with them and with regulators and corporate structures that haven't been so pleasant. I sometimes think too, and I hope it's not too much to add a little paragraph in of reading.
Oh.
Okay, I think there's something that happens for us as readers. Fiction is said to be the most empathetic form of writing. Not that other writing can invite you into the ideas, but what happens in fiction is you're in the world of a narrator. And you're steeped in their world, their worldview, you're seeing the world from behind their eyes. And I think sometimes when you're seeing a world that you yourself are conflicted with, that can create an inner conflict in us as readers. So what I'd like to do to illustrate that is I'm going to read the very beginning of two different chapters, chapter 5 and then chapter 6. So in the first chapter, Rebecca is looking back at a place where she was very active as an activist. It's called Fen Preserve. And it's simply a description of how she feels about the natural world in this place. Fen Preserve, such a beautiful place. Even as David walked away from our efforts to save its purple-green wetlands and glacier-carved ridges, it was the beauty of the place that I wanted to remember. The violet mist of its mornings, the hot white silver of its moonlight, the prehistoric trumpeting of cranes at dawn and dusk. Fens was a place where the landscape was inextricably intertwined with the wildlife and the people who roamed it. To separate the wetlands from the hills and prairies, to separate the geology of the place and its stories from the humans who researched, who set up easels and painted, who tagged plants and tallied flights. Such separations were impossible. So, as a reader, you're experiencing place to me, as just as important, if not more of an important character than any of the humans in the story. And then the very next chapter puts you in the middle of an oil and gas leasing mineral auction, where these places are being auctioned off, mineral leases, for the oil and gas industry to develop. And there's just one short paragraph that I want to read. Who could forget the oddity of sitting in a pale green room, listening to an auctioneer prattle ho and ha as the right to drill into the geological record of life below us was sold to 40-some middle-aged men wearing khakis and plaid button-downs.
I like that.
Thanks.
We have two audience questions, which is really great.
Good.
One reader says, or participant says, I'm excited to read your book. Does your story cover the fracking wastewater? and more importantly, the disposal of that toxic water?
It does indirectly. You know, deep injection wells, the potential for all those lubricants and minerals spreading around in between geological layers, causing earthquakes, maybe seeping back up. Those are things that I'm very familiar with all of the research that I did. So in the novel, Rebecca and the students often kind of bring up these things. They're brought up in meetings, they're brought up in the ways she thinks about it. But it's interesting, as a novelist, you have to be careful not to, I guess, write nonfiction. So there's, I hope, just enough of that message in there without becoming too much of a teaching tool. I hope that makes sense.
Well, another question, is Fen Preserve based on a real locale?
Oh, it sure is. There is, thanks for that question. There is a Pierce Cedar Creek Institute. It's in Berry County, a little southeast of Hastings. It's a place where I've taught and retreated myself as a writer. It's a summer, what you might call like a bio station. Students from colleges all over the state come to do research as well as art and writing. And Fen Preserve definitely comes out of my my connection to that place.
Some readers have noted that this novel spends a lot of time on the nitty-gritty of activism. So what's your rationale for making it to go from that perspective?
Yeah, so the beginning of the novel is split into two portions. The first half is called Showing Up. The second half is called Showdown. So in Showing Up, it literally follows Rebecca and these four students, the characters, Kate, Sonia, Brett, and Mark, through their attempts to do everything, let's say, the right and legal way. They are showing up at oil and gas leasing auctions. They are, you know, showing up at public meetings. They're doing their research and getting the word out through articles and songs and pictures to the public. And there are some readers who, I guess because Showdown, what happens in Showdown is you're in the action camp where people from all over the state have come together and they've decided to act to try and stop this super frack from starting. And obviously at Showdown, there's a lot more action, things move faster. But I was really interested in writing the story about the very real activism that I saw, about people from across the state coming together, bringing their own gifts, whatever they were. And I also didn't want to shortchange that process. I wanted the reader to feel the frustration of people who try to protect their places, to feel what it's like to be at a public meeting with a sign that is posted that says, members of the public may not speak. And I also wanted people to know, to have that, I guess sometimes we think that activist as a label is some special person, maybe somebody who's born with some traits. And I wanted to show a less romantic version of what an activist really is. You know, real life people who tire out sometimes, who aren't perfect, but they're just out there doing what they think is right to protect land, water, air.
On the subject of activism, I wanted to mention, I forgot that earlier on, that Flo actually was involved with empowering communities back in 2012 to 2015. We drafted ordinances for at a time when there were no state or federal laws that really dealt with protecting communities against these impacts. So we've been on a track record on it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about this current status of fracking. We haven't heard much about it lately. Is it still a major threat, or is it going to be a major threat later on?
Yeah, I do want to go back, Dave, and say, yes, flow was absolutely there. That is one of the reasons why I wanted to organize a February pre-sale to benefit Flow. Flow was the organizational first responder. I met Jim Olson, met Liz Kirkwood. During that time, we shared a lot of events and research and public meetings. So on the issue of fracking, you know, I think it's barely sleeping. I think there are all sorts of developments that we could see happen if we're not careful. Just this week, the New York Times, several environmental organizations are writing about a pipeline to Mexico. There's a port in Mexico that was, made to originally import gas up to the US. Now they're looking at redirecting in the other direction because the US is capable of producing a lot of fracked gas. The LNG, the liquid natural gas that can be transported by sea. I think under the right conditions and under the right administrative push, a lot of unconventional oil and gas methods could expand.
We actually have a fan question already. It says, the questioner says, is the book available now or will it not be available until April 2024?
Thank you for that question. The official publication date for Landmarks is April 16. So April 16, the book will be available. It should be in bookstores. If anybody's in the Grand Rapids area, you can keep an eye on my website or my Facebook site. I have some author events coming up all over the state, but they begin in Grand Rapids. And one of them is an April 16th launch party at Books and Mortar bookstore in Grand Rapids. And I will mention too, if anybody happens to pre-order the book, not that I'm pressuring any sales, and you want to come to one of those events, I'd be happy to talk to you, to sign the book, whatever.
Actually, we know one store that's going to carry the book. Tina has mentioned, Tina from Bay Books of Sutton's Bay says she'll carry the book. She looks forward to reading it, and she'll make it available in the Earth Wisdom section of her bookstore. So we've got one fan out there already who's going to sell the book.
Nice.
Yeah,
Thank
she's got a great store, by the way. A comment. I like the importance placed on place and the auction subordinating, erasing the idea of the rights of people on environment, creeks, wetlands, habitat, and wildlife. Property rights in the hands of corporate monarchs, editorial here, have become extreme in a neoliberal era that has no room to recognize that all property rights depend on responsibility to protect the commons on which we all depend. There's more to say about that comment, but I think I'll leave it at that right now. It sounds like he or she gets the point of your book, at least.
Yeah.
I also have some technical questions. I don't know if you can answer them, but I'll throw them at you anyway. How many fracking sites are in Michigan forests and then also national forests? Who issues the permits? Are they revocable? Are new applications to frack? Are environmental impact studies required? What counties are these fracking sites located? It's a lot. Maybe we'll have you answer them afterwards in writing or something.
Yeah. So my research is a little old in terms of that boots on well site stage. But first of all, permitting happens through the Department of Environmental Quality, at least in the state of Michigan, and in most states there's some kind of body that permits that.
Well, legal now, by the way.
What's that?
It's replaced the name of DEQ.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And at the time when I was actively moving from frack well site to frack well site, as far as state forest sites, there were about 12 active frack well sites, which may not seem like much, but keeping in mind that each frack well, there's a vertical boring and then horizontal legs that go off from that. So I'll use an example of one that was in the Gladwin State Forest area around Roscommon. the total depth and length was 16,000 feet. So it went down about 8,000, went out about 8,000. So you're down more than a mile, going out more than a mile and a half. And a frac well site like that can be returned to, and that fracking process repeated as long as that well is productive. So more and more horizontal laterals can be drilled from one frac well site. Nationally, I don't know what the number is now. But of course, public lands throughout the country have been leased for oil and gas development.
You know, there are fracking sites in the Upper Peninsula.
To my knowledge, no. Basically, a lot of them, as far as northern Michigan goes, in the state forests, were, you know, Antrim, Kalkaska, Mansalona. I'm saying areas now rather than, I'm trying to think. Like I said, my research is kind of old. But there were also several sites that were happening in a different layer south. So even well sites around, say, Ionia and places like that.
A comment from a question from a participant says, bricks and mortar sounds great. Would this book lend itself to a book club discussion?
Well, sure it would. I'd be happy if someone wants to get in touch in terms of an event or a discussion. Please, definitely, you can leave a comment on my website, which is MaryannLesert.com. Get a hold of me on Facebook. But yeah, I think that this is a book that could lend itself to discussion. And one of the things that I hope makes it even more timely is its emphasis on democracy, on protecting our right to speak up, to organize, to be a part of nonviolent civil disobedience. You know, there's every day it feels like, not just here in the US, but around the globe, we're seeing more and more challenges to democracy.
I noticed that the original title for this book was Threshold, and then you changed it to Landmarks. Can you describe what you meant by threshold and why you changed it?
Yeah, so one of the things that happens, you know, in the course of publishing a novel is oftentimes editors or the publishers will have ideas. You know, they've read your book, they come up with ideas for the title. So the title did change, and at first I was kind of, I'm not sure about this, but I'm kind of glad it did. I really like the title Landmarks. The original title Threshold had to do with something that is discussed in the novel between characters. And this is the idea that as a person who cares about a certain issue or place, as an activist, if you call yourself an activist, you have to decide ahead of time what will push you to act. Because if you don't decide what that threshold is, where will I act? Where does something happen that I know without questioning anymore, I will go into action? If you don't have that threshold, then we have a tendency to continually question and rationalize and wait, even as things get worse and worse and worse.
Okay.
So it was pretty much that idea of, where will I stop thinking about it and start doing?
Okay. You teach, obviously, and I guess the question I have about that is, what are you seeing in the attitudes that young people today have about the environment and their chance to make a difference? Is there a lot of gloom and doom, or is there hope? What's the state of the student mentality out there, the youth mentality?
Yeah, so I teach undergraduate courses, but I also get students of all ages, of course, but predominantly, let's say 18 to 22. And there is a lot of concern about the future. There's a a writer named Britt Ray, she's actually Canadian, who writes about the concept of eco grief and eco anxiety. And when I allow students to talk about that, it's pretty amazing how much they will pour forward and get engaged with that idea. And when I first saw that, it's interesting. A former student of mine who's a singer-songwriter, she was doing an opening singer-songwriter set at an environmental conference that we were both attending and presenting. And she swung her guitar across her lap and she introduced herself like this. She said, "Hi," something like this. "I'm from the generation who's been told since 5th grade that we're screwed." You know, and that impact was so, it's like, oh my gosh, you're right. You know, I think of my frustration as somebody who was an undergrad in the 80s and who grew up in the 80s and 90s, you know, coming from the 70s where all this environmental protection policy was coming into fruition, and then watching it chipped away at during the 80s or 80s, 90s, and especially the 2000s. But these students have grown up from the beginning hearing about climate change, living with it. One of my students described it that he said something to the effect that I've been alive for all of the hottest years on record. I've been alive for all of the worst forest fire years that people have seen. And so there is a lot of eco grief. There is a lot of anxiety. I think what they would say is they want us to admit to it. They want us to openly talk about it because it invites them into the conversation. They understand when they understand the science, they understand all of those ideas of tipping points, you know, and how we're crossing them now. But they also don't want to stay there. They want to know what to do. They want to know, okay, we know it's dire. We know we're running out of time, but what can we do? We have to have something to do.
We were talking before the event today that there's always that danger of paralyzing people into into inaction if you make the stories too negative or if they see problems as intractable. So how does your art fit into that? I mean, is your intent to motivate or mobilize people, or what's the, do you keep that in mind as you're writing, is what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think the way it's kept in mind as I'm writing is just because of the way I am or see the world. The natural world is an extremely important part of my life. I'm very spiritually connected to the natural world. And so I think that anytime I write a character, their connection to the natural world is just going to be there. But I also think that, I'm sorry, Dave, I lost my place on your question. Re-ask that if you would.
The question was, there's a risk of paralyzing people in inaction if you present only gloom and doom.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And even when I teach environmental literature, I talk to students about this. I say, you know, the typical tendency in being made aware of environmental problems is the first 9 chapters are doom and gloom, and the 10th chapter is here's what we can do. And that approach may have had its good points when the audience wasn't that aware of climate change, of the science behind it. I think as the public becomes more aware, I think our art, our activism, at least for me, I want to show people how we can come together and do things, how we can each bring our own gifts. We don't have to be this superhero activist. We can make a difference just by showing up in our own ways, whatever that is. There's an interesting progression of the idea of art and activism that I think is it's really inspiring to me right now. So when I first started, I guess, being a part of organizations, the word sustainability was huge. You know, sustainability, say 10 to 20 years ago. And within the realm of sustainability, of course, the environment, the economy, the equity, those E's were very important. And one of the things about environment was recognizing the place of art, music, literature, because culture is a story. Culture isn't just a given, it's a story we tell ourselves, the idea was. And we need to change that story away from, you know, the fossil fuel era, away from consumerism. Well, just recently, with many of the climate reports that are coming out, storytellers, artists, writers are not simply being called storytellers. Now they're being called change accelerators. So the time factor, the crunch time is there, but recognizing that, you know, changing people's hearts is an important part of the process.
I think art is a good way to do that. Change people's
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah, absolutely. To have that immersion in a sense of place, especially when I write, is something that I hope people feel when they read. I think the way a good song can really touch something in our emotional core, and even art, visual art and dance.
We have a comment from one of our participants, says it's so important to focus on what we want. Pristine forests, healthy forests, focus on what we can do. Thank you. So got another fan out there. I wanted
Oh, thank you
subject-
very much.
subject of activism, there's a place in the novel where Kate, who's one of the characters, says, "Oh, we're coming together, not becoming each other." What does that mean in the context of activism and in this book?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, I really, you know, it's interesting. I considered that line, including it or not including it, as her dialogue several times. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure it stayed was, and by the way, the previous comment about, you know, visioning, working toward what we want is so important. But so when Kate says, we're coming together, not becoming each other, it's a statement that I wanted to put out there because of one of my worries is that we are so focused as humans on divisiveness, on whether we see eye to eye on each and every issue. You know, we label each other and group off in ways that worries me sometimes. The idea of civil discourse about ideas we disagree about seems less and less prominent. There's a lot of shouting, a lot of arguing, a lot of right wronging. So to me, that was a call to think about, you know, air, water, and land are something, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, we all depend on. Not to mention the Earth's intrinsic value, the intrinsic value of water, the sacred value of water, land, sky. So at first level, it was about that. Let's remember that there are certain things, no matter how we vote or how we feel about this issue or that we all should be able to come together. And certainly say clean water is one of them, protecting the natural world. And the other thing was I originally wrote the novel to honor the activists that I saw during those years, during that 2012 to 2014 to 2016. There were individuals and people all across the state who came together to share information we had about frack well sites, about tar sands pipelines, you know, water well drillers, teachers, pediatricians, students, musicians, you know, superintendent of a school, you name it, just people from all sorts of occupations and interests, members of the indigenous communities that were looking to protect and co-manage land from a position of treaty rights. And nobody ever asked each other how we were voting. You know, we were just there in a common ground effort.
You have a passage you want to read to us from the book?
Yeah, you know, based on that reviewer, it was a Publishers Weekly review, actually, and the reviewer obviously got the novel. They said some really good things about it, but there was also that polemic comment, which, you know, I get it. Rebecca isn't perfect. She sometimes, you know, feels and expresses disdain for certain, you know, oil and gas industry activities. But I want to read you a passage where Rebecca is, you know, also expressing the idea of human empathy. She and Kate and Sonia are out at a frack well site, and a drill rig supervisor kind of discovers Rebecca, you know, climbing around the berm and taking pictures. So this is her thoughts on that. Sonia and Kate and I had been out on the state Lexford site for hours, and I had been so determined to capture the mess behind the drill rig that I crawled through the vine-laced ferns, sneaking up over the berm to get shots from all angles. When I was discovered by the drill rig supervisor, I decided to stay and talk, to be exactly who and what I was. I leveled with him, and we had a conversation about drill rigs he'd worked on in Louisiana, Pennsylvania, in the Middle East, and in Ukraine, where the people were some of the friendliest he'd ever met. He was the one who told me about the guys on the floor, how they had the real shit jobs. He didn't go so far as to talk about the lost fingers and the mangled hands, but he expressed real human empathy, at least for his crew. And as the western horizon cooled to periwinkle, we shook hands. Later that evening, Kate and Sonia reviewed what we'd seen and done that day, and I stared into the fire and sighed. I felt sadness, true sadness, and I admitted it. The two of them were laughing at me for coming clean with the guy, for admitting my intent to share what I was seeing and smelling and learning. When he came toward us as we crouched down and worked our way through the woods, Kate and Sonia had angled away and I had stayed, giving them time to sneak off. But as he and I stood together and talked, the feeling that people who believed in their work and others who were stuck in such work were blasting the earth below us with horrible chemicals and sand mined at great cost brought on that awful sense that there was no stopping the process. And so, as we talked about his wife being a physician's assistant, how she'd gone to Ukraine with him and spent a year working in an orphanage, we bonded in the most momentary way. We were all doing a job, doing the best we could.
I like that very much. Another reader praise, it says, brilliant sentence, we are coming together, not becoming each other. Ties in well with your earlier message of making a difference by showing up in your own way. So that's another review you got there. I always want to talk to a writer about your practice. How do you write? You have a routine, and what is your daily or weekly rituals?
Well, the first ritual I have is journaling. I find that, you know, my first thoughts, even about a novel, like a novel like this or another novel, oftentimes I'll journal as a form of just kind of listening to the ideas of a certain character or situation starting to gel in my own mind. And then if I'm actively working on a piece of writing, when I know what it is, usually I don't start writing, say, something as big as a novel until I know the whole story, or at least most of it. And at that point, I usually continue to journal. And journaling is just a way that I keep in touch with my own creative mind. I would love to have that be a daily practice, but as a full-time college professor, there are weeks and months where I'm reading a lot of other people's work and working to make their work stronger. And that's fine. But I tend to be kind of immersive then. So luckily for me, I don't teach in the summers. So at that point, I'm outdoors as much as I can. I love taking a journal with me and sitting outdoors and starting there. And then by the time the idea really starts to gel, I'm set in a daily pattern of journaling. Of course, I've got my favorite coffee mug and a good cup of coffee next to me, and my favorite pen. And then usually, an hour or so into journaling, I'm ready to hit the keyboard and start working a little more faster and letting the ideas flow. Yeah.
I don't know if you've been following this issue, but the state of Michigan and the feds are working on restarting a nuclear plant on the shores of Lake Michigan. And there's a question here. It says, what is your take on the apparent resurgence of nuclear as a source for energy production in Michigan?
Well, I can't claim to be an expert here. But I do think that, the concept of peak oil that was big around 2000, especially and beyond, I think that has hit the public consciousness. And I think that people worry that in a transition, let's say, to greener energies, and of course, all energies have their ups and downs, mining for materials, for instance. But I think that the resurgence of nuclear power is probably a part of that, of recognizing, the oil and gas that we have is no longer easy to get to. We're shocking and fracturing the bedrock. We're, boiling gooey tar sands, pits and chemicals and things to get tar sands. And so, I see it all as related, that there's a hope that somehow nuclear power can be maybe a bridge to a future, or that it will somehow be cleaner, be less risky. I personally don't feel that way. I think anytime you're introducing elements into the natural world and burying them that have a half-life of 24,000 years, it's probably not, something I would feel good about.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that. I wanted to shift gears for a second. Your previous novel, your first novel, was Base 10, and it's gotten really great reviews. And I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about that, what that book's about, and the reception it's gotten.
Yeah, so Base 10, it probably is an outcropping of place being so important to me. Born and raised in Michigan. People from other places, when I talk about art and activism, often refer to Michiganders as water people, because we go out to other places and talk about water a lot. And certainly I'm one of those people that is really connected to place. So in Base 10, the novel also took place predominantly, the character's home place was Michigan. She was an astronomer that literally had been away from her stars, at least in her research way. So the story follows two female astronomers who are actually astrophysicists. And early in their student days, they both attended Michigan Technological University before they started working on research, astronomical research at the University of California. And they had this kind of epiphany when they were both standing at the top lookout ledge of the Asable Lighthouse in Ludington, in the Ludington area. And one of them had grown up in that kind of range between Ludington and Manistee, Nordhaus Dunes, that area. And what the novel does is follows Jillian, the main character. She goes on a solo 10-day trip on her own in those forested dunes. and she's just trying to kind of make some decisions. She's a scientist, but she's married, she's had children. And for her, as an astronomer, being able to fully commit to her research would mean being away from home a lot. And so she's just at that stage where she's trying to kind of restart what she needs to do, I guess, to be herself. And it just so happens to involve, you know, the natural world and the cosmos.
It's still in print, I assume, right?
It is still available.
You pick it up at bookstores or online or what?
Bookstores, online, the Feminist Press, anywhere you shop for books. Even Target has it online.
Base 10, folks. Yeah, just a few minutes, and there's one more question I wanted to get to. I don't know if you're gonna be able to answer this, but it says if you kept up on the injection wells and the waste coming in from Pennsylvania. You know anything about that?
I know from my old research that was always a possibility, especially in the southern portions of Michigan and the southeast portions of the state. Based on our basin geology, there were certain things about those underlayers that made for good deep injection well sites. I know that the possibility of the fracking industry at large, using whatever geology in whatever state they could to bury those wastes was a very real possibility. And of course, not only the risks, but just moving liquids out of their original watersheds and basins. There's all sorts of, problems there. Near the end of the novel, Rebecca, the narrator, has this kind of what's often called a slide, where a character is just thinking thoughts and the emotions are boiling up. And she looks at the action, and she looks ahead at what the oil and gas industry would do with Michigan if their best vision came to bear. The idea that we would have frack well sites zigzagging down the state, ports that were available to ship out liquid natural gas to an oil and gas hungry world, and the southern portion kind of being a dumping ground for the wastes. And she also thinks about a future, at that point, say about 2014, the idea that the aging tar sands pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac would be replaced by a future oil tunnel.
Interesting. Just one final question I have is, do you do book events at bookstores? Would Tina at Bay Books in Sutton's Bay be able to get you to go out there for an event, or do you do only events online or other sorts of things?
Yes, Tina at Sutton's Bay, any other bookstore owners, managers, I'm happy to come out in person. It's one of the great joys of being a writer. After working on a novel for years, being able to share it with people and meeting people, talking about what matters. I love in-person events too.
Great. And again, how do people get the book? Where do they go to order it? If they don't go to a bookstore, or what's the best way to get a copy?
Well, first of all, if you want the proceeds from your book purchase to go to Flow for the month of February, any pre-orders that come in for the book through bookshop.org will be donated to Flow. I want to honor the great work that Flow does. Outside of bookshop.org, you can pre-order the book anywhere. But again, I'm definitely encouraging you to order through Bookshop. And then after that point, when the book comes out on April 16, you'll be able to purchase it anywhere, online, in bookstores.
Great. Thanks, Tina, or Maryann. I was thinking about Tina again. Thanks for a great discussion and for writing a great book. I think I have a chance to read it myself again, and I would recommend it to anybody who's interested in reading about an environmental issue that's told through fiction. It's really a great approach. So thanks, Maryann. Appreciate it. And I'll turn it back to Carrie right now.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you both, Dave and Maryann, and thank you to our audience for being here with us today. I want to express our gratitude for our Flow donors and supporters who make webinars like this possible, and also especially to Maryann for her generosity. Thanks to Maryann, all February pre-sale proceeds of Landmarks will go to support Flow and the important work we do to defend the Great Lakes. We will follow up in a few days with links to a recording of this webinar. Additionally, if you are interested in making a donation to enable future conversations like these and support Flow's work to keep the Great Lakes protected for current and future generations as a shared public resource, we'll be dropping our donation portal link into the chat right now. We have a final favor to ask. Please fill out the brief survey that will pop up at the end of this session. Your responses help us develop new webinars and Art Meets Water programming opportunities, and we would love to know what you think. Thanks so much for being with us.